Hey guys, another One Take review, and today I wanted to talk about the classic Boris album, Amplifier Worship. While Amplifier Worship as an album may not be Boris's most beloved, that title maybe goes to Feedbacker, if any record in particular, with how extensive their discography is. I will say that Amplifier Worship is certainly a defining example of not only drone metal, but sludge metal, and it manages to kind of carve its own niche in, again, Boris's very extensive and fairly consistent discography. Rarely do albums sound as absolutely colossal as Amplifier Worship does, and of course, the sludge metal and drone metal genres are based around sounding epically apocalyptic and destructive, but I do feel that very few records, at least that I've heard over time, manage to capture that style and that sound and that aesthetic better than this album does. While Boris's work here is certainly them perfecting drone and sludge metal at the same time, just taking the pure essence of those subgenres and making them as best as they can for the Japanese experimental rock metal band, I do think that they also managed to make sure the instrumentals never grow stale either. There's tempo change-ups galore throughout the entirety of Amplifier Worship, and at the same time, it never has to let up on that heaviness or sacrifice that destructiveness for those change-ups to ensure that the record has some sense of variety to it. All in all, Amplifier Worship is just a series of an hour-long, just constant punches to the head, but in the best way possible. I will admit, however, that I'm not the biggest fan of the vocal work performed on Amplifier Worship. This is really just a matter of personal opinion, personal preference. I just happen to enjoy more vocalists in the sludge metal, drone metal subgenres that sing in a lower register and sing in a more monotonous fashion, and songs here like Huge are the antithesis of that. While that track definitely does deliver some powerful screams, it just unfortunately isn't entirely my thing. There's maybe a song or two here that kind of have some more just straightforward but still chaotic vocals that suit the instrumentation, that maybe bring about a more noise rockish punk kind of feel to it almost, but the album as a whole doesn't embrace that sound enough for it to totally work for me either. Even still, with a little bit of vocal work I enjoy here or there, compared to just the album overall, I can't really say I'm a fan of the vocal work here. At the very least, the singing isn't for me, I'll say that much. Even still, I try to make my opinions in these reviews come off as objective as possible, which is kind of the ultimate purpose of reviewing, but there's no denying that Amplifier Worship has some absolutely amazing vocal work. It just so happens that said amazing vocal work isn't really suited to my tastes, which is a shame, because I feel like if it were, I would absolutely love this, but, well, obviously I would, but I feel like this is kind of almost the ultimate depiction of that kind of style of vocal work paired with sludge and drone metal, but sadly it's just not for me. The vocals are, in my opinion, well done and well performed. It's just, as for my actual opinions themselves, it kind of drags the album down a little bit, but overall, not a lot, at least. It could be a lot worse. The vocals could have been just poorly performed, in my opinion. I would much rather have something that I recognize as good, I just don't really think is my thing, than something that's just outright horrible to my ears, so I will say that the vocals don't drag things down too much for me, and it's really just a matter of opinion here. Something that deeply impresses me about Amplifier Worship as an album is just how cohesive it feels. It really is impressive. And while this is something that would definitely be featured on a lot of different albums throughout Boris's catalog, I think that this record pulls it off especially well. Generally speaking, I think that this album should be experienced just from front to back in one sitting, but that doesn't necessarily mean it isn't able to have tracks that work outside of the context of the album itself. Pretty much every track here is great in its own way, in its own right, and it works outside of the record, but I truly do recommend just hearing it for the first time from beginning to end. Of course, Amplifier Worship is a record that's difficult to revisit on a casual basis, and I mean, I'm not saying that you need to, come back to this and constantly give it over an hour of your time for you to be able to appreciate the music to the fullest extent. I just think that maybe for the first time listening to this, especially if you were a newer fan of Boris, that you really should hear this just in one sitting, in one piece, because really the record does kind of feel like one piece. It may be a handful of songs, but as far as I'm concerned, it's one song with a handful of different suites to it. After all, the way that each individual track seamlessly segues into the next before wrapping up the record with the absolutely world-ending sounding vomit self is nothing short of extraordinary, and I think it's something that, if you're unfamiliar with it, should be experienced first and foremost before kind of picking off different pieces of it. Overall, Amplifier Worship can be very intimidating conceptually. An hour of drone and sludge metal that has vocals that I don't particularly care for or even really like all that much doesn't really sound like that great of a time on paper, but it ultimately is. While it does have some flaws and kinks that make me enjoy it a little bit less than I otherwise would, Amplifier Worship is just the thunder of Zeus himself in the form of a sludge drone metal record from just a bunch of random metal musicians from Japan that would kind of go on to become music gods in their own right. So, with that being said, I'm going to give this album a 4 stars out of 5. I think it really deserves it, even if it's got a couple aspects of it that I don't like, particularly the vocals. But for the most part, it's a really fantastic listen, and it's definitely an experience, to say the least. So, 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I will see you guys in the next one.